So hey guys, and welcome to part 3 of the 5-day Godzilla special. And today we're looking at the Bato Goji suit and the Heisei era of Godzilla. Now this era was like a reboot, so this film is considered a sequel to the original one. And I think that's quite telling in the design of this suit, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. But the reason I picked the Bato suit is most of the Heisei suits are very similar, and there's only very minor changes between each of them, like sort of slight change in the bulkiness of it and stuff like that. But the head sculpt is more or less the same for most of the suits of the Heisei era. So I just picked my favourite one really from the Heisei era, which is the Bato Goji from the movie Godzilla vs. Mothra. So yeah, let's jump into Sculpt and have a look at the Bato Goji. Now you can probably already tell that this suit is a lot more similar to Godzilla 1954 than some of the a lot of the Showa suits actually. He goes back to having quite a small head on quite a chunky body with these little spindly arms again and very chunky legs. Now we're going to have a look at a bit more detail of this, but let's just put him side by side with Godzilla 1954. And you can see that the designs are a lot more similar in a side-by-side comparison than the Soshingeki suit and the 1954. Now the face on this one, I think, is a lot more... obviously, when you look at him from the front, he looks kind of silly, but from the side, I think this is definitely one of the more menacing suits. And like I said, the Heisei era was a lot more serious than the Showa era, so I think they've tried to recapture the design of the original Godzilla, because obviously that was their sort of serious beginnings of the franchise. And I think they've done a relatively decent job of trying to sort of channel the original Godzilla whilst keeping it fresh and giving it a new design. Now this is really where the prominent chest bone was solidified. If you can see the sculpting on that, sticks out a mile. It's really, really nicely done there. But sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. If we just have a look at the face, he's got a lot more of a serious sculpting. You know, he's got the more sort of the smaller, more serious head sculpt, a lot more reptilian-looking design to it. But one thing they have done, which is again sort of recapturing elements of the original, is this one seems to have a blend of the scales and the leathery skin texture. If we look at the sort of the back and the sides of him, the skin texture is very leathery, like the original, but the chest and the front of the figure is very scaly, like the sort of slightly newer Showa era suits. So if we just have a look at the spines here, they're a lot bigger than the Showa era, and to be honest, they're pretty big. I think they're some of the biggest spines in the era, actually, of the franchise, to be honest. They're quite thick, and they're quite close together, so they look pretty big. The arms are again quite spindly, like the original suit, but they are slightly I mean, they're small, but they're chunkier than the original suit. So again, it's kind of combining elements of the past two sort of major figures that I've looked at. If we go down to his stomach, obviously he's quite a chunky design, quite a fat design. The legs especially look sort of very, very fat, especially from the sides. And again, you got the tail, and now this is by far the longest tail, I think, that we've looked at so far. And it's nice. It's a very weird design. Not much to it in terms of spikes, and it's very segmented, which was very strange. But I think this suit is slightly difficult to describe, really, because it is so similar to some of the elements of the 1954. And I think it's a little weird trying to differentiate them, really. But yeah, I think the Heisei era, they were really trying to sort of do their best to recapture the frightening elements of the original. And I think they did do a good job, and I think they did a good job of redesigning it so it sort of aged a lot better. As I said, with the 1954, it looks... For the time, it looked really serious and really menacing, but it does kind of have that sort of slightly funny look to it now. Whereas this guy... I mean, this was from the 90s, this era, and I think it does have it has aged slightly, but I think it does have a lot more of a long-lasting menace to it. So yeah, in sculpting, I think this figure's got a lot more going on, but I think it's not a bad thing. I think they've really captured it here. And yeah, I like this sculpt. I think it's my favourite suit of the Heisei era because, like I said, the Heisei era suits were all very similar. It was just a case of very minor differences, so it was just a case of picking my favourite. And the Bato won. So yeah, I would definitely give this figure points for its sculpting. In terms of paint, it's got a little bit more going on than some of the previous suits we've had a look at. So first of all, yeah, the vinyl is this sort of base, sort of dark, very dark blue, almost black colour. The toenails have a sort of yellowy colour to them, as do the fingernails. There isn't as much highlighting or shading on this figure, I've just noticed. It's pretty much just that one consistent colour. There is a little bit of highlighting on the tail. Then the spines are this sort of gradient that go from a sort of light, sort of aquary blue down to the base colour. He's got the same yellow for his teeth as he does for his nails. Got a red tongue in there, and he's got golden eyes, which was an element of the suit. That's not just a weird choice of the figure. He did have sort of golden coloured eyes. So yeah, the paint job is a lot more sort of detailed, I think, than the last two. But that's because he comes from an era where, you know, there was a lot more of a definite colour to him. So yeah, I think this suit's paint job is quite a lot like its sculpt. It's got a lot more going on than the last two, but it's really, really spot on, and I think it's really captured the character. I mean, I mentioned that they've tried to recapture the sort of seriousness of it, and I understand that some people might see his sort of chunky legs and little spindly arms and small head and think, well, he looks silly, he doesn't look menacing at all. But for the time, you know, this was going from an era where you had the funny, goofy Soshingeki sort of era Godzilla, where he, you know, jumped about and propelled himself through the air with his laser breath and all that kind of stuff. And they went to a lot more of a serious Godzilla, and at this point, he was also a villain again. You know, he wasn't sort of, you know, he would destroy cities. He was a lot more menacing, and he was a lot more of a villain. So it was definitely a drastic change, and I think it really did bring back the sort of the fear factor of the Godzilla films, which I think was a really, really nice thing. So yeah, the paint job and the sculpt, I think, have captured that perfectly. So in terms of articulation, this figure is quite similar to the Godzilla 1954. He has 360-degree arm movement, and they will actually go past the hips this time. He has 360-degree head movement. His legs have articulation, but again, don't go 360 degrees because of the sculpt, but they will both go to about there. So there's a lot more movement in the legs than the 1954 figure. This figure doesn't have any tail articulation though, so I suppose that lets it down slightly, but the articulation is very functioning. It's not too stiff and it's not too loose. I just wish there was a little bit more of a tail articulation in this figure, and that would have made it perfect. But yeah, the articulations are a lot better than the 1954, and pretty much on par with the Soshingeki suit that we looked at yesterday. Now this seems to be one of the more common Bandai standard Godzilla figures, and I've seen it go for between £20 and £25 on Amazon and eBay. However, I picked this figure up myself from Manchester MCN convention in 2014, and I paid 10 quid for it, brand new, and I was really happy with that. I was going to pick up some more figures there, but I'd already bought quite a lot of one-piece figures. I bought a big Figure Arts Hody Jones and a Banpresto Brook figure, as well as some other stuff. So I didn't really have enough money when I finally found this stall that sold Godzilla figures. Now I know the stall's there, and they said they're there most years. I intend to pick up some more figures this year, and they were doing a lot of Ultraman stuff as well. So, but yeah, I picked this figure up for 10 quid, and I was ecstatic about that. It was just such a good price to get this guy for. I don't think I've ever paid that little for a Bandai standard figure. But yeah, you can find them for 20 to 25 online. And yeah, I think that's a decent price. If you can get it for like 10 quid like I did, snap it up instantly because that is a great bargain. But otherwise, yeah, the 20 quid I would say is reasonable. 25 is maybe getting a little bit close to being a little too much. But yeah, 20 quid I pretty much would say is spot on for this figure. And it is one of the more common ones, so you'll be able to find this figure a lot easier than you will the Soshingeki one. So what overall do I make of this figure? Well, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's a really great figure. I love the suit. I love the Bato suit so much. I think it's definitely the best of the Heisei era. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this figure, and especially for the prices I mentioned before. In terms of what I think of the design of the actual monster at this point, the Heisei era is probably my least favourite of the three eras, simply because I just don't think there was as much going on in this era, other than, of course, Godzilla vs. Destroyer is one of my favourite Godzilla films, but that was the final film of the era. And I just think this era, it didn't have as much going on for it, and I kind of wasn't as big of a fan of them making him a sort of evil character again to begin with. And I understand that it was a reboot, so that's fine. They wanted to do something a bit different with him by bringing him back as an evil character, but I think he lost some of his charm in this era. And I think if you take away the charm factor of Godzilla, there's more or less just his menace and the sort of cool, badass elements of him. And I think the Heisei era kind of was gearing more towards that, and I think this suit quite well did it. There is some silliness to this suit, but I think that's just a sign of the era more than the character. So yeah, overall I think this suit is great, and I do like this era. I don't dislike any Godzilla film, but it is definitely, in my opinion, the weakest era. So thanks for sticking around for part 3 of the 5-day Godzilla special. If you stick around for tomorrow, where we'll be looking at part 4, we'll be looking at the Millennium era, and the suit I've chosen for the Millennium era is the final Goji, which isn't my favourite suit of the era, but I'll explain why I chose final Goji tomorrow if you stick around. And then on Friday we'll be looking at the Legendary era. And there's only one suit of the Legendary era, so we'll be looking at that one. So yeah, thanks for sticking around, guys. If you stick around for tomorrow, we'll look at Final Godzilla, and then on Friday, we'll have a look at the Legendary Godzilla. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.